Institute of Technology for the NEXUS and International Society for Organization Development and Change Rethinking Think Tanks webinar. We have a great lineup for you today. There's going to be several models of think tanks, past and present, that we're going to be going through. I'm going to turn it over to Jerry Glover in just a second. I just want to make sure that you guys all can get into the chat room and can find a way to interact with us so we can do a Q&A after the session. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through some of the models. If you can see through the webcam, we have all of our folks that are at FIT right now, and they're going to be going through several cases of think tanks, and this is in preparation for their discussion this weekend about what is the future of think tanks. So if you guys have any questions, using the GoToWebinar control panel, you can either raise your hand or you can send us questions at Nexus through the questions pane. You can also go to Jesse at the tinyurl.com/SteveKatyWebinar, and you can enter your questions and your reactions in there. We have about 9 cases to go through. Each of them are going to get about 4 to 5 minutes apiece, and then we're going to do questions at the end. So if you look on your chat pane and GoToWebinar, you can go to tinyurl.com/SteveKatyWebinar or enter them right into the questions tab on your GoToWebinar control panel. So I'm going to hand it over to Jerry Glover to kind of do a welcome.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rich Griffith. I'm the Executive Director for the Institute of Cross-Cultural Management, and I want to welcome you here to Florida Tech and to Melbourne, Florida, and a good virtual welcome to our folks that are joining us via the internet. As Jerry started to describe what he was looking to do with this process, one word came to mind for me, and that was constraints. And often I see businesses or organizations, when they hit a constraint, they view that as a problem. I've always viewed it as an opportunity. And in this case, I think we're going to use a couple of constraints. One, we're going to jam 15 people in a tiny little room, and we're not leaving until we're done. And we're going to constrain ourselves on time. So in 48 hours, our goal is to be able to come up with a good model of a think tank moving forward. In the next hour, you're going to get to hear an awful lot about some previous models. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry, who's going to chair the session.
Thanks, Rich. First of all, I want to thank Rich and Leah and the other people from FIT for all their support in hosting us, and thank all the members of the group that are here. All the people that are involved in this participative session this weekend on think tanks have been involved in community and organizational development in some way. Some involved in national development issues and even regional development. So the idea behind this weekend is to look at the concept of a think tank, and this is a think tank about think tanks. And so what we hope to happen is to be able to come out of here with some ideas and approaches that we can then apply even later this year in having another think tank, but maybe having more people who aren't involved in this one present, including leaders from corporations and governments and communities and so forth. In this session today, we're going to do a very brief overview of some collaborative and innovative attempts from the past and from the present that illustrate examples of community and organizational and national development from around the world. Our expected outcome from this webinar and from the weekend, in a sense, is that we would create a dialogue about something that's been around for a long time, but something that probably needs to be revisited and something in which we want to spend more attention and time on. So we hope to be starting a grassroots type movement here that will eventually end up to be something that's on a continual basis, where we might offer think tanks on a continual basis for a variety of needs. So with that said, let me go and talk about the first case, which I've put in there. And you may not think of the Inca Empire as a place to look for community and national level change. But indeed, the Incas give us an example from the past. When they were building their empire, they had a very unusual approach. And their army would take over a community. They would take the people in the community and send them 2 or 3 at a time all around to live in different communities that were Inca communities, so they became socialized right away. And the sons and daughters of the rulers were then sent to a Inca school in Cusco. And that whole approach of taking given that it's forceful change and given it's not exactly what most people are interested in terms of the concept, it's not a bad idea to look at some of these things that have been used in the past, because community change and national change has been around for a long time. It was very effective, by the way, because the Inca were able to develop quite an empire over the time that they were there. Interestingly enough, in the late 80s, Delta Airlines used a similar approach, not forcefully doing as much as they did, but they used a similar approach in that when they merged or acquired Western Airlines, Delta would put Delta employees inside of Western employee stations, and the Western employee stations were moved to other places. Everyone at Western Airlines is given a hire date with Delta of their original Western hire date. They did a number of really interesting things to merge the existing acquisition into the culture of Delta. And the Western employees were given same recognition as Delta employees. There was less of the divisiveness that often occurs in an acquisition. So anyway, that first case from the Incas tells us historically that's been around for a while. There's certainly many other cases we can look at around the world, how collaborative and innovative ideas were used to create change and development at the community and the national and even regional level. I want to look next at the VICOS project, which Suzanne will tell us about. And the VICOS project was a classic study done in the 50s. Suzanne?
Thanks, Jerry. Basically, a group of Cornell University anthropologists looked at a community and they changed the way, basically changed the leadership of a group. So empowering the locals, they moved, the dilemma that they needed to reconcile was shifting from a mindset of inequality to more equality. They really focused on dignity, positive human values. There was democratic representation from the groups involved. The role of the women shifted, and the women became involved in the production and sale of lace. And the culture was really tied in with the new methods. They talk about the traditional huts still being used as where people lived. At the same time, they were introducing new farming methods that improved the production of potatoes, which then could be sold. Eventually, the groups moved from changing their farming methods and transferring these over to other groups within the area. And the results from that project far outweighed anyone else using the traditional methods.
I might mention one thing is that when you see on the first line on the slide, for those of you who are looking at it here and virtually, bought a hacienda is exactly what they did. They took grant monies and bought 500 peasants in VICOS from a wealthy landowner who at the time basically owned the people. And during the process of 10 years in the 50s, this group completely transformed the community into one where people were empowered. They ran their own communities. They improved the healthcare system, the education system, and like Suzanne mentioned, the potato production was up 400% in 5 years. That tremendous record of success. And it's interesting we put this in here because, interestingly enough, not too many people are aware of this study, because the study has been it was done in the 50s, and for some reason I find a lot of people aren't aware of it, and it is something worth looking at because it does have some really good methodology in terms of applied change and also in terms of the results they actually got.
Jerry, this is Lena, and I just wanted to double check. Did you say that when you say they bought a hacienda, they bought people?
Yes, they did.
Would that be akin to slavery?
No, it would not, because what they were operating in is a situation in the hacienda, a situation of servitude in which the hacienda and the people were technically owned by the landowner in Cusco. And when the Cornell people went there, they took grant monies to pay the landowners so that they could basically free up the people that were on the hacienda from the landowners' reign. Okay, so it was a reverse situation. Okay. Now the next one we're going to look at in terms of cases is the American Hotel and Motel Association Quality Assurance Project, and I have one of the people who was on the original Quality Assurance Committee, American Hotel and Motel Association, and was very much involved in the early pilot programs that we had, and in the early diffusion of the idea into other properties. It originally started out with 7 pilots, ended up within 5 years of over 500 properties that attended a conference on it. And so that kind of interest was created that quickly. Anyway, I'll let Cheryl tell you about it. Cheryl Van Dusen.
Yes, it's hard to believe that I've known Dr. Glover that long, because he was part of one of the original pilot properties. He was at Boca Raton in Florida, and the American Hotel and Motel Association picked 7 name brand properties because everybody was starting to talk about quality. Ford was running around going, quality is job one, and they had no idea what quality is. You know, they later brought in Dr. Deming and made some progress along those roads, but back then everybody's going, what is quality? They were trying to copy the Japanese, but what this did was to stimulate industry-wide awareness, the fact that we truly needed to come up with some quality management initiatives. And it wasn't just statistical process control. And by picking name brand properties like the Waldorf Astoria and providing ongoing updates through their magazines and conferences, it became a great diffusion model. Because at the conferences and through their educational institute, we were developing books, we were developing results. They, in fact, became longitudinal studies about how these companies were focusing on quality and what measurable results that they were able to show. Regrettably, not all 7 were successful. However, they were successful because it ended up spearheading industry-wide change into this industry, not just at the 5-star elite level, but all the way down through the mid-priced hotels, the upscale hotels, the economy hotels, the budget hotels, and today we take quality for granted and we know that it's not tied to price. But this, because of the visibility and the continued awareness, it really did change the industry perceptions.
Thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, and the interesting thing about it is I told Steve Shriver at the Tall Ships Bar in New York once after we had a meeting, this is all culture change, because that's what it was. It was changing from a culture in which quantity was important and quality wasn't. And one of the major dynamics that went on is that people had to shift their values in terms of how they looked at things like labor scheduling and dealing with customers and so forth, and that they had to create more of a balance between quality and quantity.
Jerry reminds me of one particular incident. They were having trouble with delays at the front desk at a couple of these properties, people having to wait to get into their rooms. So, you know, typical traditional thinking at that time said, okay, we'll put in a bonus system. So for every room that you clean over your 15 allocated rooms for the day, we're going to give you a $5 bonus. So all of a sudden there were no delays at the front desk because the rooms were all cleaned early and on time. But then when they would check the guest into the room, the front desk phones were ringing off the hook because things weren't quite clean the way they should be. So the quantity, the bonus, the reward structure, all of this came to light, and we were able to start talking about these kinds of things, about the balance. And it's not just shoving the numbers through and ticking boxes, but the ultimate guest experience.
Thanks, Cheryl. That's great. And I'm going to ask Harris Friedman to tell us about the Bahamas Hotel Training Council, which was a national level involvement that he was involved in, and myself back in the 80s and the 70s. And I'll turn it over to Harris.
Well, Jerry and I were invited to come to the Bahamas to address a problem that was there, namely of all the Caribbean nations, the Bahamas at that time had the worst rate of return tourism. People would visit the Bahamas once and not come back, whereas a lot of the other Caribbean nations, tourists were very loyal and would continue to come back to return visits. So Jerry and I undertook a nationwide survey at that time, and we used both qualitative and quantitative approaches gathering data, and we found a lot of very interesting things. For example, one of the things that we found was the differences between the cultural values and attitudes of managers in the tourism hotel industries compared to the workers. Most of the managers were expatriates living in the Bahamas from Britain or the U.S., and they saw the world in quite different ways than most of the workers in the industries. I'm thinking of one situation where Jerry and I were involved, where there was a concern about the quality of wait staff, where wait staffs were accused of being rude and surly to their customers. And Jerry and I were at a restaurant, and we were talking to a manager of a hotel, and the waiter who was waiting on us was just absolutely wonderful. So Jerry asked the manager, well, you're complaining about these surly wait staff, and this guy is just doing a superb job. And the answer was, he's new. Whaley has a little bit of experience, and then he'll become just like the others. But the underlying dynamics were that there were concerns about being subordinate, with the native Bahamian people not wanting to take on that role of subordination, and there was a lot of reactance in terms of establishing status, and these were all sorts of dynamics that we uncovered. And then once we had that information, we were able to feed that back in ways that led to training and a lot of system-wide change.
Okay. We also based a lot of the initial interest in this on the fact that the major tourism islands of Nassau and Freeport, or New Providence Island and Freeport, had return rates around 10%. Visitors who said they would come back. And in the other islands, in what they're called the family islands, they were called the out islands at the time, they're called family islands now, their return rates were more on 40 to 50%. And so we wanted to know, why was it in the other islands, which were less developed and probably have more of a Bahamian feel, why was the visitor return rate higher there? And of course, that's one of the reasons why we did the study. We also found that in the process of evolving tourism as a national industry, that the unions were very important for the local Bahamians, but we then realized that there was also a middle management union against the upper management, which tells you the degree to which the division between employees and labor were there. So we worked over there for quite a few years actually, but part of that impetus for trying to do something about it was the Bahamas Hotel Training Council, which then became one of the instruments of their work was the Bahamas Hotel Training College, which became a legitimate two-year school to teach Bahamians how to work and manage in the hotel industry. Okay, so it was a very important study in terms of national level development, and I think there were a lot of things that came out of that, which certainly make it a very interesting case. Okay, the next case we're going to look at is the Pacific Change Leadership Forum, and I'm going to ask Cheryl and then Harris to talk about it, because both them and myself were involved in that quite a bit. And
okay, well, this was a leadership forum that we helped put together in the 90s, and it lasted for about a decade. And Jerry and I wrote a paper for Harvard Asia Pacific Review called The Burden of Other People's Models, and I think that captures well what we were trying to do. A lot of the people in Fiji, which is an island nation in the South Pacific, composed of, I think it's almost 1,000 islands, who felt burdened by other people coming in and telling them how they should do things in Fiji. So Jerry, and working closely with a fellow named Tom Vitalavoni, who was one of the major financial leaders, he was a CEO of a major financial corporation in Fiji, put together a forum where people could explore ways to create change and to increase quality that would be generated at the grassroots rather than imposed from the outside from a Western perspective. And this was very interesting. I went to a number of the fora, and one of the things that I recall that we discussed at one of them was how to develop in Fiji. And there were two models for the hotel industry. One was to build high-rises on the beautiful beaches in Fiji and let the major Western corporations like Hilton and Marriott and Sheraton build their high-rises. But the native people wanted to maintain the sense of place and to keep a Burry style, Burry being the grass hut sort of one-story building. And so there was a lot of discussion about cultural appropriateness and looking at that in contrast to, say, Western models of development. So with that stated, I'll let Cheryl talk a little bit as well about her remembrances.
Well, the end result of Harris's discussion was that the Fijians finally decided nothing taller than a coconut tree. And so ultimately they have been able to maintain the beauty. But we were dealing with lots of different industries there. And the most critical aspect of this change model was the fact that we were dealing with true CEO, government ministers, people at the top, and that's what it takes to facilitate this type of change. Without the involvement and those being the major drivers of change, it doesn't matter what the grassroots people want. They can want it all day long and they can make some efforts. But if you truly don't have it sanctioned at the top, you're not changing the culture. And Fiji was a wonderful culture. They still love the Queen. They were originally a British colony. They just love it when she would still come by. But they also had Chinese that had been brought in, and there were Indians that had come in to be the laborers. So there were some class issues here that we had to deal with in the workforce as well. And predominantly we dealt with the chiefs of the villages, and we had to use the village system for decision making because that was what was effective in the workplaces. Everything that they had grown up with and socialized into was still going on. And then we had Western companies trying to say, okay, no break in the morning, and everybody yet was getting together to socialize, and they would bring food from home, and they would talk, and they would share. And lots of business information exchanged during these informal discussions. And then, the Western models would come in and say, oh, no, you get a 10-minute coffee break, and you can't get back to work, and efficiency. And it was just blowing their whole system apart. And so we were able to go in and, through the involvement of these key people, maintain their center of balance.
We had in the Change Leadership Forum, there were 20 organizations that paid an annual fee into a central fund, which we used to operate the Change Leadership Forum. For that, we had 3 to 4 think tank weekends a year, which only CEOs and the direct reports were allowed to participate. And in those think tank weekends, which is what we really call them, they were able to see different new ways of doing things. Some of the things that were coming around, like teams or re-engineering or customer service or use of technology. Any of those ideas we brought into the think tank weekend, and they would learn about them, and then they'd spend the rest of the weekend working in groups of peers, other CEOs and other people who were decision makers, sometimes even competitors. And from that, they learned about the innovation. They then were able to experiment and do something with it in their own organization, and they served as resources to help people through the change process and through the change leadership process. Consultants weren't allowed. People who were consultants were members, but they weren't allowed to come in and sell their wares. And so it was mainly an internal, collaborative, communal type of change system. And it worked very well for 12 years.
It did. And the people were very, very smart. They told us early on, no, we don't want this new fire truck. And we said, why wouldn't you want this new technology? And they said simply, that truck only needs 3 people. And our group is 6 people. And we know if we get this new truck, 3 people don't have jobs. I mean, they were realizing early on that technology was going to be replacing people, and that went against their cultural system.
Okay, and the next one we're going to talk about is with Maureen O'Hara, and she's going to talk about the International Futures Forum. I'll turn it over to Maureen.
Right. Well, I don't know whether whether we're really a think tank or not, but this was a project that started in 2001. Was funded by British Petroleum rather generously because they were concerned about a big project that they were dealing with in Grangemouth in Scotland, where they were closing down a refinery, and this was the principal employer for the whole region. So they gave us some money and said, look, go away and think about this problem for a couple of years. And we had a group of 32 economists, media people, entrepreneurs, energy professionals, government officials, politicians, philosophers, ecologists, you name it. We had an incredibly interdisciplinary group, and we were asked to work on the problem of the implications of taking effective and wise action in a world we can no longer understand and cannot control. And what we recognized as a group, and that was also part of the agreement to join the group, was that we were way beyond the possibility of incremental change, being able to handle the multiple complex challenges that were facing humankind at this point in the 21st century, and that the level of interconnectivity, interdependence, uncertainty, and coherence has resulted really in a step change in the level of complexity that everybody in leadership and in non-leadership roles having to deal with these wicked problems. And we are now in the 14th year of a 2-year project. We met for 2 years on BP's dime, and then we've self-funded since then on the grants and so on. And we don't work with individuals. We work with, we don't work with organizations. We work with individuals inside the organization. Someone inside the organization who's recognized that the level of challenge that they're facing doesn't yield to business as usual approaches, and that recognizes that something really different has to happen. And so what we do is we partner with them, that we in fact collaborate with them on learning their way through to another kind of understanding of what their potential is and what their potential solutions are to their issues. We've worked with municipalities, we've worked with the city of Varanasi in India, we worked with the city of Falkirk in Scotland, we work with the Scottish National Health Service, the UK education system, K through 12, and all of these systems, what they have in common is that the people inside them realize that no matter how many models of change that they use, it's not working, that they end up with the same kind of problems, often even worse than they were when they started. So what we found was that inside these organizations, people understand that it's not working, they're in a great deal of pain, and there's often somebody in there who's got the courage and the boldness to say, let's try something different, and we work with them. And we found that so far with our work, that successful projects have something in common, that they have a leader or a champion inside the system who we call a person of tomorrow, somebody who is working at 21st century capacity. They're holistic and they're individualistic, they're systems thinkers, but they're also empathic and in depth. They're people who are, in a sense, know how to play a bigger game. And so we've been working with these people to sort of characterize what it takes to be in these very large systems under massive amounts of change, hold themselves together as human beings and actually make a difference. And we've got 2 or 3 books that we've put out recently that have some kind of charting of that, although I have to say that every system is different. One of the projects was the NEXUS, which is a nuclear waste storage system for Great Britain, and they have to deal with nuclear waste for 150,000 years. There isn't a manual for that. They're having to learn their way forward. And so we finished, I've ended up with wanting to show you how we worked with the city of Falkirk, which was the city that BP was moving out of. And they were very proud of their 5-year plan, except that when they talked about it with us, that they had this 5-year plan. They had no excitement, they had no inspiration, had no enthusiasm. It was like lockstep, this is how we're going to do it. So we started to challenge them. Our friends from India or Africa who were on the team said, there's something kind of 19th century mechanistic about all this. Don't you guys have any dreams? Don't you guys have anything that really makes your heart sing? And they started to tell us Celtic stories. And so out of this interaction came a new dream for a big park system, an eco park in the center of Falkirk that joins up all these cities that never used to talk about each other. And in the middle of that, they built these sculptures. And these are kelpies. These are mythic horses that are part of Celtic legend that come out of the ocean to warn mariners of where the dangers are and to point them in the direction of the new horizon. So in the middle of this old industrial brownfield, now when you're going up on the freeway, you see these kelpies and people go, oh, wow, what are they? Including the people who live there, who for years have thought of themselves as being boring, middle of Scotland, nothing much going on, let's get the heck out of here and move to Edinburgh. So somehow or another, out of this process of deepening the connection to their deep myth and their deep imagination comes a transformational opportunity. So IFF is really about finding that transformational vibration in our communities and putting it to work to go beyond business as usual.
Thank you, Maureen. The interesting thing, as you may notice, the audience virtually and the audience here, is we've brought together a collection of people with a lot of experience in our area of community and organizational change. And the expertise that we've been able to put together in this small group is quite amazing. And what we're planning to do, just to let you know if you're wondering at this point or interested virtually, is we're hoping other people will be interested in getting involved as well. So if you have an interest in the concept, certainly you can contact Nexus for Change. You can contact Rich Griffith at the Institute for Cross-Cultural Management, or you could send an email to me or anyone else that's here that you happen to know us. But we'd love to have more people involved, so the next time we do a think tank, it'll be more expanded, and we'll continue to look at the idea. But the weekend that we're going to participate in is to come up with looking at what has been done and come up with some approaches that will hopefully work in this current day and age. Okay.
Jerry, it's Lena, and I just wanted to add a little comment to Maureen's wonderful story and experience, and how that actually plays to me as being reminiscent of something called appreciative inquiry that really speaks to the dreams that people have and drawing to that positive psychology.
Well, we actually called our process an appreciative inquiry process, but we weren't really hooking up with David Cooper Ryder, but we really were appreciative of the people that we were working with. These are amazing people.
Okay, we're going to move next to Nancy Golden, and she's going to tell us about her work in Rwanda.
Well, I think for those of you who are not familiar with the story of Rwanda, in 1994, the Rwandan genocide basically decimated that country. Almost 1 million people were slaughtered in 100 days. So you can just imagine in that short period of time what that does to your economy. Also, the majority of the people who were killed were male. So overnight, you had a transformation, a change in the power structure, and also no cultural construct for what was required to rebuild it. Mm-hmm. They didn't turn to a think tank. They turned to just their own resourcefulness and the leadership of President Kagame. That president had a vision that is still playing out, and one of the measures of his success, from my perspective, having been privileged enough to work with the Rwandans, is to see what can be done when you have the kind of leadership that is based on empowerment. And I think one of the things that you've heard around the table today, as we've discussed think tanks and everybody's interventions in various corporations or cultures, is the need to listen to the voice and to hear people. And because, as Maureen was saying, whether it's the traditional history of the group, there will be a solution to the problems. And what had happened was, Kagame said, not just out of necessity, but the growing realization in Africa that the women had been voiceless and invisible and needed to come forward. And their key was to build a driving force for a private sector in which women entrepreneurs would play a leading role. And the interesting thing in terms of our discussion on a think tank is that, like the Incas, the approach that was chosen has been, in most part, Western-based, coming with measurements that are Western prescriptions for success and weren't exactly fitting the challenges of training women entrepreneurs to succeed in a culturally relevant construct for themselves. So the think tank that I want to talk about is really something almost like a powwow, because we focused on the dilemmas with the permission of one of the lead and one of the few remaining entrepreneurship training modules that has been established by a group out of the States. And with their courage, what the think tank did was three things I think are relevant. We looked at the dilemmas that were being experienced by the women. We gave them voice, and we empowered them to be able to change it to make sure that the model would fit. And just to be very succinct with you now, what did they learn? That and this is after the first 5 years. In 5 years, no one had asked them, does this work for you, right? So what they found out was the model was totally upside down. The model was, as we would expect from the West, focused on making sure that the individual entrepreneur succeeded. Whereas they have a collective society, they work in teams, so the learning was individually focused. The women wanted a focus on social enterprise and not just private enterprise because, again, it's community focused and they like to build strength from among their community. The learning modules, they wanted all the things changed, and in fact, the financial model was based on Western accounting, which isn't even used there, and a business plan says that would really be interactive. And so the outcome has been that we're working right now on an e-learning module for them. But again, just the sense of community, giving people a chance to have a voice, and the breakthrough that they now own, right? So that was Rwanda.
Okay, the next case we want to look at, and we have two more cases, and we'll have open discussion, and for those of you who are online patiently waiting, we'll be able to take questions and discuss things with you. I want to turn to Mary Hoover, and she's going to talk about educational leadership.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you all for letting me be here and have a voice at this table. The case I'm going to talk about relates to a change in how university leadership preparation programs in the field of education do business. And the culture of leadership preparation at many institutes of higher education was that at the graduate level it became a cash cow. And we brought in lots of tuition dollars and generated a lot of certificates, and it really wasn't relevant whether the school districts and the communities into which we were sending these prepared leaders were getting the leaders that they needed. So with the help of a lot of press from policy change and a lot of press from the private sector, it became clear that if leadership development departments were going to survive in institutes of higher ed, they would have to change how they did business. And not everybody was very excited about that. The good news for me is I was in my first year in higher ed when all this happened. So to me, I was, oh, yay, we get to create a new way of doing business. So I had the opportunity to work on this pipeline initiative. And what we decided we were going to do is to not be experts from the university, but also not just expect experts to be from the communities, that we would bring people together to really get out on the table what was important for the schools that we were going to be sending these leaders to. And so our first step was to reach agreement on developing a competency model to clarify the performance expectations. And so while we did introduce new learning, we all looked at a lot of empirical literature, we looked at practical case studies and things like that. That was only a starting point. We tried to, much like this whole weekend is about a think tank for creating think tanks, we decided that what we wanted to do was to create a learning community to help perpetuate learning communities in schools. And we defined a learning community, as you can see on the slide, with some expectations that if you were a part of that learning community, you were committed to continuously seek learning, but also to share the learning that you had. So we weren't really identifying anybody as expertise. And the external consultant only served to facilitate the surfacing of expertise from within these university partners and the school district partners. So we ended up using a lot of really interesting constraints of protocols for how we interacted with each other, and then within those constraints, it really freed people to surface their expertise in ways that was safe. And over time, we broadened the engagement. So we utilized large facilitation group techniques such as the World Cafe and an unconference to bring people to the table to just have open exploration, and always took it back to our original learning community, which was really an applied research team, to develop the materials that then the school districts could come and truly partner with the universities, because often partnerships between universities and local schools were, what can we do, what can you do for me? And so by having this iterative cycle of true learning together through the variety of partners, we have been able to create a different approach to performance-based leadership preparation, which has been really exciting, and we can look at a lot of qualitative indicators in schools where these leaders who come out of the program are, and there's a much greater sense of community within the school and between the parents and the community. We can also look at quantitative measures like student achievement, which we know in the United States is a huge driver in all that we do. So the notion of creating community between partners and establishing these true learning communities was quite a powerful catalyst for changing leadership preparation. And it spread to a lot of other universities in the particular state where I am, which is Georgia. The policy change left a lot of institutes of higher ed freaking out because they were losing their students, and organically faculty from all 14 institutions in the state were able to come together and learn with each other and begin to see how the programs and the partnerships could really influence one another. So,
thank you. Okay, the last case that we're going to discuss is John Spalding. John, you there?
Yeah, I'm
John, you're there.
So thanks, and thanks for allowing Nexus for Change to facilitate the webinar and also be represented as one of the think tanks. Nexus for Change started through Bowling Green State University and the Master Organization Development Program, work of Steve Cady and his authoring the Change, the second edition. And hold on one second. I'm getting a little reverb from our folks at FIT, so I muted you guys for just a second. But I'll bring you back, don't worry. So it started at BGSU through the MOD program, and it was looking at bringing practitioners, activists, leaders together to learn these large group methods, which we've all heard of: appreciative inquiry, World Cafe, Kathy Denner's whole-scale change, open space technology from Harrison Owen, and it's using that to how can we use dialogue and conversations to address critical challenges and opportunities in our world. And it's morphed into kind of what Nexus for Change is now, which is hosting webinars, connecting stories and people from all across the globe. This is our second webinar just this week, and on Wednesday we had people that came in from 5 in the morning in Australia to listen to a webinar from a person that was in Europe and everybody in North America that was also involved. So it's just connecting individuals who are dedicated to using the principles of collaboration and dialogue-based methods. And we use tools and technology, including webinars and trainings. We've gone and we've done the post-conference session at last year's ISODC conference in Amsterdam, and several small group discussions and things like that. And like our slide says, if you visit us at nexusforchange.org, you can also connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. For our webinars, we're now doing kind of webinar debriefs on LinkedIn. And if I can, I'll show you our website for just a second, just so you can get kind of a flavor of the way we've redone it. And then I'll send it back to you guys for your follow-up questions, because the questions that you guys have posed are really good. And we have some stuff in the chat room that I want to bring in as we close out. So I'm just going to show you guys the website for just a second. You'll see my screen for a minute while I move it over. And so what you're seeing right now is just our website for what is Nexus for Change. I'm only going to go through the About one, and I'll click over to our homepage. But as you can see, we've really tried to redo it, and we've integrated it. So this is more about what Nexus for Change is. There's some great video here. This is from the initial Nexus conference, and it goes through the story for change. And if you watch the videos, part 1 is the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. Part 2 is the late 80s into the 90s, and part 3 is the 90s into the present. And that is, what are the large group methods for dialogue and collaboration, and how have they, what's their kind of rise and their kind of claim to change? And so that's a good one. And then as you can look on the right, you can see that all of our blog posts are integrated, and then all of our Twitter is integrated. And if you look at LinkedIn, all of our LinkedIn discussions and people that are posting their reflections to webinars are over there on the right. So we are responsive to our community, very involved with ISODC, and we are always willing to highlight and promote people that are out there doing good work in organization development and change. And if you are willing and want to show your work, then we definitely want to work with you. So thanks, Jerry, for including us, and I will send it back to you guys.
Hey, if I could say one thing, John, real quick, or Jerry, can I say something?
Sure. Welcome.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. This is Steve Cady. Nice summary, John. One of the things I wanted to share, and again, hi to all my friends on there. I heard Lena and some other people there. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, the thing that I think that's interesting about this think tank is similar to the Change Handbook, and what I think is a real passion for that we all connect around as a group of professionals that do this work, and that is that we are all trying to find ways to make our world a better place through tapping that wisdom of people. And what I found with the Change Handbook is that there are so many people doing great work that are not aware of other people doing the work. And if we can continue to connect, so again, thanks for having this, because this is about connecting us that are doing this work. I'm really hopeful that we can make a better planet and a better place than that we now have. And so my hope is that Nexus can help that, and that we can help create those connections. And we're all doing that as well. So, John, that's a nice summary. I think that if the thing that I'd put out there is that all of you are doing great things. We just want to know how to help you bring your voice, bring your good work, bring your wisdom out to the world, and connect with others that could benefit from it, and also know that they're not alone.
Yeah, John, am I on? It's Jerry.
Yep, you're on, Jerry.
Okay, thanks, sorry. Well, look, we've been able to get through in a short period of time a number of cases which people said that we wouldn't be able to do, but we have been. And that's great, partly and mostly in part to the fact that our presenters were aware of the time. And secondly, because of the great work Bob Lucas and Lena Neal in keeping the time. Because without the two of them, we'd probably still be on the third case and Harris Freeman would be talking. Anyway, as you can see, we've had also a number of cases, a variety of motivations, variety of philosophies, anywhere from appreciative inquiry to hateful inquiry. And we've been able to show that the concept of community and organizational change is a prevalent issue. And so we want to continue to work on this. For those of you, once again, if we don't get a chance to say it again, please contact us if you are also involved in working somehow with us, because this is a sort of an organic group that's coming together, and we're going to try to see where it goes. Okay, now with that, I'm going to turn it over to our facilitators, which is Lena Neal, Jeannie Moss, and Rich Griffith. And I'm going to ask them if they will facilitate the remaining discussion, which includes, of course, working with John to see what questions might come up, and also to look at what we might be able to summarize from our meeting so far.
Okay, we've heard some amazing cases this afternoon from a number of our folks here around our table. What we'd like to do now is to see if there are some common learnings or some common threads that run through all these cases. What might some of these be?
Well, one thing I kept hearing, Mrs. Tracy Garrett, was empowerment and voice. Those were two things that stood out for me that I think were forces for the change that happened. When you empower people, when you let them have a voice, you're going to see a change. So those were two really important things that I thought stood out.
Thank you, Tracy. Somebody else?
I think one of the other areas that I heard from several of the cases, and this is Lena, has to do with leadership and the importance of leaders, wherever the leaders may come from, whether they are designated leaders or whether they are informal leaders. It doesn't matter, but those who have respect and the ears, if you will, of the people that are involved. So leadership was one of the things that I heard from a number of our presentations.
Others?
I think the need for cultural awareness, that when things are imposed as the best or the right way to do things without understanding the different perspectives that other people, particularly people you're trying to impact, may have, which is the flip side, Tracy, when you're not empowered. That's what we see happen. So people are resisting prescription as a way of finding a solution.
I would just like to add, I think that we have to be careful, even in using words like empowerment. So what's that look like in the United States versus China, where someone might be resistant to the notion of being empowered? There might be different flavors of empowerment. So something that seems like a truism to us may not look the same in other parts of the world.
Great.
Could we switch to the people out virtually for a few minutes and see what they have to say?
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm going to go through a couple reactions in the chat room. There's a question. So I'm going to put you guys on mute just for a second at P. So a couple of the reactions were, Kelly said that the answers are within the system for sure. You just have to give them the forum. Lori said that being attentive to the local culture and not overpowering the people in the system is critical. She said also when you're doing that, localizing the approach that you take towards working with that system is essential. Brianna agreed with Kelly and said listening to the voice of those involved in the changes in the culture. And then Bob said that he learned the relationship between leaders and models, and the fact that if he buys a retirement hacienda, he will suddenly have 500 mouths to feed, apparently. And then one of the questions, sorry that I unmuted, Bob. You would have been able to hear all of their laughter as you saw that. But one of the questions was, and it was just a baseline question, and I think this would be for Jerry or maybe Rich, is can you give them a baseline definition of and what you mean by when we're
Put us back on mute, John. We can't hear you.
Can you please repeat that, John?
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Good question.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. What is the definition of think tank as a base? You guys.
That's what we're here to decide. Seriously, think tank is really where you get together a group of people who are stakeholders, whether direct or indirect, and you have a chance to think through ideas or issues relevant to particular predetermined needs. And I guess that's as good as I can come up with. Rich?
I think it comes back to the idea that I opened with, is this notion of constraints. If you take a lot of smart people and give them a long time to solve a problem, sometimes nothing gets done. But if you put a lot of smart people in a room and give them 48 hours, well, then you come up with an 80% solution that you might be able to run up a flagpole and see if there's any support for it. So I don't know if that'll ultimately be the model, but I think that's what we're going to give a try.
I think this is Tom Myers. I think there's a real question around what are the common incentives. For example, in the Pacific, those island nations are not all that interdependent, as I understand it. Is that correct? Right. And so what was the common motivator for the folks to show up from these disparate places with different disparate cultures, although some similarities, and to participate in the forums and so forth, the think tanks that were held. The VICOs, I have never heard of that, unfortunately. Yeah, and I should have at some point. The hacienda was running, okay? So the people from Cornell didn't really have to change a thing, okay? They chose to do that. And it wasn't the people who lived on the hacienda, because they believed that they didn't have the power to change anything. Okay, so things could have stayed totally static. And yet there was a real successful change project there. And again, it's a question of what are the motivating incentives. As things got better, I'm sure the workers, I think they're referred to as peasants here, they were, yeah, paisanos, right? So they probably had some incentive to gain more of the benefits of the new way of doing things.
Yes, there is a link to the VICOS project on the Cornell website. You may want to Google it for the VICOS project, and it's got all sorts of material, cases, videos, all sorts of material on the VICOS project, and it's quite a fascinating project.
Yeah, we use it on a class that we both teach. But there was a Vicoseño at Cornell. That was the connection. There was somebody from the hacienda who'd gone to Cornell, and so it wasn't like just kind of out of nowhere. There was already a link to the village.
Yeah. So there was a link, but what about the incentives? That's not totally clear, I think, as to what the common incentives were to participate.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is Lena, and I wanted to go back to John. John, what else are you seeing out in the chat room? Other questions that we might want to address in our last couple of minutes?
Lena, you're a great facilitator, by the way. What is the difference between transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary?
Well, I'd like to take a crack at that. I think that there is a whole new conversation about transdisciplinarity, which is really not my discipline and your discipline. It's what happens when the two of us get together and we create a new discipline at the interaction between you and me. So transdisciplinary really dissolves the disciplinary boundaries and creates a new configuration of knowledge, where interdisciplinary tends to be each person bringing their own disciplinary expertise. So depending on what kind of process it is, it might be interdisciplinary or it might be transdisciplinary.
What else, John, have you got for us? What else are the people wondering about or commenting on?
Go back 2 minutes.
And thank you for that response. And then I'll do the last one from Kelly. She just wants to know, and I know, Jerry, you said Vicos was online. Are there any other of these cases that can be found online? Perhaps we can supplement the slides that you guys have with some links and things like that.
The biggest project is probably important. Maureen,
yeah, my book, I have a little book, tiny brochure on the case that I talked about. It's called 10 Things to Do in a Conceptual Emergency, and it's on the website for the International Futures Forum.com, and it's free for download.
anyone else on the group here have some resource that they want to let our audience
Maybe that's our action item.
What's that?
Maybe that's our action item.
Well, it could be a start in terms of providing resources somehow for these cases and illustrations, yeah.
This is Harris, and I might mention that Jerry and I have a book that just was published through the American Psychological Association on transcultural competence, and some of the examples that I talked about regarding the Pacific Change Leadership Forum are included in that, as well as a number of others.
And after that self-serving remark, I'd say that we're probably almost finished.
Yeah, well, and I'll also chime back in and say that there is the webinar for Harris and Jerry's book on March 31st, so there's the registration link. That'll go out. For all of you that are in Florida right now, you can apply as well, and all for this of your time and of your stories. If you could go back to the PowerPoint that you guys presented today while you're there and update any URLs or web links in that PowerPoint, because a copy of the PowerPoint will be going out to all of our attendees that joined us virtually. And so any links that you have in there, just maybe have Leah put them into the PowerPoint, and we'll send them out to our folks. I'm going to go and we'll show one last slide as we close out. So if you'd like to, in the questions pane or in the chat room, give us a Gestalt checkout, a bumper sticker checkout, and we'll give this to our folks in Florida. What are you leaving with from today's session? Make sure that you join the ISODC for their 3rd International Conference on May 25th. There's a link to their session here. We want to thank the Institute for Cross-Cultural Management and the Florida Institute of Technology. Thank you, Rich, for all of your work, and Leah for putting this together today. We will have a discussion debrief on LinkedIn, so I will put the last questions from our think tank group in Florida on LinkedIn. So if you want to reply there, you can. And then there's going to be a NEXUS webinar survey. So once we close out this session, click on the Send Us Feedback page or the Send Us Feedback tab, and we'll be able to get some feedback from you all on how today's session went. Kelly said thanks for the offer for links and resources. And I will go back to Florida just to say goodbye to everybody there. And that will be all. So thank you all for attending. And
Bye. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, everybody. So this ends today's session.
Thank you.
And we will see you again soon.
Bye, John. Bye, Steve.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Lena. Bye, Derek.
Bye, everybody.
Steve?
John?
It says 15.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No.
Under attendee.